Anyway, let's talk about assisted dying. Dr. Gillian Wright is here, Director of Our Duty of Care, who are a group of healthcare workers who oppose the intentional killing of patients by assisted suicide. Dr. Gillian, very good morning.
Good morning, hi.
Hi. I was quite disturbed yesterday. I was on the tube and I saw one of those posters that have been put up by the assisted dying sort of advocates, shall we say, and which is quite disturbing. I mean, I didn't look at it too closely. I could see it from afar. Basically a picture of a very healthy, happy-looking woman saying, I need the right to be able to take my own life because, you know, I don't want anybody else to suffer as a result. But it's kind of gleeful and rather... I would say misleading, if nothing else, and it made me feel rather unwell, actually. And I thought, I'm not sure that those are the people that I would like to align myself with, who are kind of celebrating the fact that you can take your own life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've had huge concerns about that advertising on the tube and the whole context of them being on the proximity to the tube. I think we would really have a concern about people who might feel a pressure to take their own life, and the whole power of suggestion is really important in this bill, but also in that kind of advertising. And so absolutely we'd urge MPs today to vote against the assisted dying bill and instead to invest in high quality palliative care.
Yes, because I mean, the trouble with adverts like that is it sort of gives the impression, at least, that people are campaigning for something which doesn't necessarily affect them, but they think they should do it because they know better than everybody else. I mean, my take on all of this, right, is maybe an old-fashioned one. I don't feel that the situation we have now is a problem. It might be difficult for some people who have been questioned by police as to whether or not they've been involved in assisted dying. But nobody's ever been charged. Nobody's ever gone to court, as far as I know. Nobody's ever had to be dragged through, you know, the legal process. And normally, if people are found to be possibly involved in something like that, they sort of get let off gently by what I would consider to be a reasonable kind of, you know, sort of, you know, legal process. People realise that, you know, sometimes things happen and sometimes they go wrong. But, you know, this would seem to me to be an encouragement to people to allow or to even, you know, sort of convince people to kill themselves.
Absolutely, and I would agree that when we're not providing people with enough care, when people aren't, we know 1 in 4 people don't get palliative care across the UK. People are struggling to see their GPs and get psychological support. So to give people the means to take their own life within 2 or 3 weeks, but yet not give them the proper care, is we would feel not really a choice at all. And so we absolutely encourage MPs to vote this down clearly today and say instead that they would back palliative care, because there is so much you can do. There's so much we can do for symptom control, for psychological support, and for families who are undoubtedly distressed and grieving. But how will we respond as a community today to people who are at their end of lives and who are distressed? And we would so urge people today to back palliative care and supporting people until they die, but not helping them to die.
I mean, one of the things I haven't seen over the course of the last few weeks and all the campaigning from both sides is how many people this actually affects. I'm assuming it's probably quite a big number of people, depending on, you know, which sample you take. But I mean, I keep also reading in papers this week that it's likely to pass this bill, that there's more MPs than not who think it's a good idea.
Well, there's 2 aspects to that. In terms of the numbers, we hear it's on a knife edge. What we know is there are a number in favour, a number against, but there's also a big number of those who are undecided. And I think that emphasises the difficulty of this decision, that people are really struggling with it. And I would emphasise what this kind of moral distress that doctors would have in their practice, and that this kind of decision making that they would hand over to doctors, and the kind of effects that it would have on doctors and nurses and those who are looking after people at the end of life. So absolutely, we would really encourage people to listen to the evidence. And what we know from polling is that the more people know about this, the less they want it. The more they know about the difficulties in Canada, in the Netherlands and Belgium, where it's been extended to those who have dementia, to those who have learning disability and autism. Those in Canada, there's really big numbers that are now being euthanized. It's been extended to those who have chronic illnesses, not just those who have terminal illness.
Right.
And the difficulty is if you bring this in as a healthcare treatment, then the difficulty then is limiting access to that, because we all have rights to healthcare. So we would urge to walk away from this, please. Ask the House of Commons to walk well away from this. And we understand why people are doing it out of compassionate means, out of compassionate intentions for those who are suffering. But we would say that there is so much more we could do with palliative care if it was well funded.
And I don't think enough has been said about exactly what methods would be used either. You know, because a lot of people have said it's been rushed through. There's a 5-hour hearing, I think, in Parliament today. 175 MPs want to speak about it. The debate starts around about 9:30 this morning. I mean, I've not really heard much about. You know, it's all very well saying, OK, so now a decision has been taken, 2 doctors have been consulted, you know, all of the boxes have been ticked. What happens then? You know, what do you then do if you're, you know, my mother died recently at the age of 99. She's just sort of expired, and it was sad and it was terrible. But you know, luckily for us, she didn't suffer terribly. But if she had been suffering, what would have, you know, would I have been asked to be present while she was somehow injected with something? Would her death have been caused by somebody in my presence? I don't know.
And there's a great deal of unknowns about the practicalities of it, but we do know that there are practical problems in other countries. You know, that some people have seizures, some people are sick, some people don't tolerate the medicines. And so absolutely we do need to consider these practical problems. You know, does the doctor sit with the patient until the end, or what happens if it's a very prolonged period of time? That's just not practical. So and you're right. At the moment, what is being proposed is that the person would take the medicine themselves, the lethal drug themselves. But actually, in many other countries, they've proceeded to a lethal injection because it is more practical. But then the whole issue of coercion and whether or not it's being done voluntarily is much more difficult to determine. And so this bill is keen to avoid that. But the whole issues of assessing the capacity of the person, assessing whether or not even the nature of their terminal illness, you know, how long do they have to live, is actually a very difficult thing to assess for some people. And doctors get that wrong.
Yeah, my mother used to joke when she was younger, you know, when I say younger, she was sort of, you know, in the early 90s, and she would go, you know, if I get to the point where I'm a bit incapacitated, just give me some cyanide and, you know, I'll just shuffle off. And of course, as time went on, we used to joke back with her and go, I thought, you know, when she would moan about getting up in the morning, or she had a pain in her leg or something, I'd be like, so now, do you want the pills now so you can, you know, disappear? She was like, no, of course not, you know. And so, you know, people's frame of mind is an interesting thing, and it changes. You know, people say things they don't mean, and I don't think anyone in their right mind wants to necessarily disappear, no matter what's going on.
Yeah, I think those are really important points. The fact that people do change their minds, and they don't necessarily anticipate how they'll feel in particular scenarios. And we know from data from Oregon that about a third of people change their minds, and so it's really important, I think, to consider particularly those who are elderly, because I know that often elderly patients feel a burden, and they don't want to be a bother to the doctor. You know, they don't want to take up your time, and I am concerned that people might feel that if this was offered to them, that maybe this is something they ought to do, and instead we want to say to our elderly people, no, we will look after you and look after you well, and that's a real challenge to our society. There's a very clear statement from the British Society of Geriatrics that they are opposed to this. So the doctors who look after elderly patients are extremely concerned about this because of the risk to elderly patients, and that is moderate.
For sure. Dr. Gillian Wright, fascinating. Thank you very much for talking to us, and we'll see how it all turns out. But I'm very much, I think, having thought about it quite a lot, as I think everybody has, I don't think we need to do this, honestly. You will probably have different opinions on it, and by all means let us know what you think.